Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's good seeing you all here. This is our last panel for the day. It's called Final Reflections. For those who didn't meet me in the morning, I'm Dean Leonard Baynes, Dean of University of Houston Law Center, and co-conveners of University of Houston Law Center. We're co-convening with the Fertitta Family College of Medicine with my colleague and friend, Dean Steve Spann. And when we decided to have this conference, Steve and I spoke and we said, you know, we really need to have the leaders of the legal profession with us here and the medical profession. And we thought this would be a great way to end the panel with this really high-powered panel of people of really all different backgrounds, but are very, very important to both of our professions and industries. So I want to welcome the panelists. So I'm going to introduce the lawyers. We're going to just a brief conversation, brief discussion, just name and title. And Steve will introduce the doctors, the physicians. So first to my right is Susan Krinsky, who is currently the Executive Vice President for Operations and Chief of Staff of the Law School Admissions Council, and they're the ones who designed the Law School Admissions Test. And she will be interim president of the Law School Admissions Council, I guess probably in the summer-ish or sometime over that, yes. July 1st. So let's welcome Susan Krinsky. And next to Susan Krinsky is Daniel Mateo, who's he is president of the Hispanic National Bar Association, and he's partner at the prestigious law firm of Holland and Knight LLP. And next but not least is our president of the American Bar Association, Mary Smith, and she's vice chair of is a VENG group, and chair and founder of Caroline and Ora Smith Foundation. And Dr. Spann, I turn it to you.
And it's my privilege to introduce my physician colleagues. To my immediate left, my longtime colleague and friend, Dr. Charles Mouton, who is the Executive Vice President, Provost, and Executive Dean of the John Seeley School of Medicine. And he is, like myself, a family physician. He's Professor of Family Medicine at UTMB, and Thomas N. and Gleaves T. James Distinguished Chair at that institution. Then sitting in the middle position here of our panel is Dr. Leon McDougall. He is Professor of Family Medicine and Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at The Ohio State University College of Medicine. He is also Chief Diversity Officer of the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. He is a previous president of the National Medical Association. And take note that the three physicians at the table, we're all family physicians. So I'm proud of that.
Like the panel before us, we're going to have a more interactive panel where Steve and I, Dr. Spann, we take time asking questions of the panelists. And the first thing, when we comprised the panel, I said, oh my goodness, we have several African Americans, we have our first Native American ABA president, we have a Hispanic lawyer, head of the Hispanic National Bar Association, we have women. We've won. We have all this. Don't we have all these representations of all these people of all different backgrounds? So people looking at home or looking in the audience may say, oh my goodness, there's no need for anything anymore, because you have people holding these really important positions and they're of all different backgrounds. What would you say to that?
Well, it is a curated panel, after all. And certainly in the legal profession, although the applicant pool has become more and more diverse, if you look at the percentages of lawyers compared to the percentages of different subgroups in the population, it's not close, and particularly at the highest levels in law, for example, equity partners in law firms, a fraction of what it should be.
Yeah, and I think just for context in terms of a little bit more about my background, not to bore you, but just so you know where my comments are coming from. I am Latino. I'm part of the LGBT community. I'm the third out president of the Hispanic National Bar Association. I am an equity partner at an AmLaw 50 law firm. And so I recognize that privilege, but it is a search for unicorns. And so, you know, as president of the Hispanic Bar and the slides that were shown previously and the comments now, we are grossly underrepresented. And when you start adding intersectional identities to that, the people who are making decisions at some of the largest law firms and corporations are not representative of the population. And just quick highlights, Latinas continue to be among the most underrepresented of all minority groups in the legal profession, representing 1% of law firm partners. So we are not even close.
Very good question, Dean. And in reflecting what you just said, I look back on my life and how am I here? And with this being a law and medicine conference, so let's talk about Brown versus Board of Education and me growing up in Sandusky, Ohio, with a population of about 20% black people, and in my elementary school having one black teacher, my 4th grade teacher, Miss Stacy, Miss Wilma Stacy. In the 4th grade, she told my parents that you need to start preparing for college for Leon. So what's so important about that when we look at this context? So there is research showing that black men especially, if they have an affirming black teacher in their lives, much more likely are they to graduate from high school and go on to college. So that's part of it. Also, recognizing the value of the civil rights movement that brought that to bear. Some of the heavy lifting was done by the legal profession. So that's why in my question earlier, I want to lift up this conversation regarding the role of the legal profession in our broader society. Move that along, I have to acknowledge the National Medical Association, established in 1895 when the American Medical Association would not permit membership. So why was that important? You needed to belong to a society to have hospital admitting privileges or to go on to specialty training. Move that to now. Going to medical school, being motivated to become a faculty member, Dean Baynes, Dean Spann, because I didn't see very many people that looked like me as faculty members. And I said, hey, I think I'm going to try to change this. So became a faculty member, then full circle, becoming Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at my alma mater, the Ohio State University College of Medicine, where we've done a good job. We've increased our faculty diversity. Now we have about 112 black faculty. When I went to medical school, it was almost like, hey, I saw a black doctor today. Something to celebrate. So, last thought regarding black faculty at medical schools, we only comprise 3.9% of all faculty nationally. So I'll end there. thank you for that question.
Thank you. President Smith.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Mary Smith, President of the American Bar Association, and as Dean Baynes mentioned, I'm the first Native American woman to hold this role in like the 147th year of the American Bar Association. And thank you. And you know, I also am a first-generation law school graduate, but also a first-generation college graduate and even a first-generation high school graduate. My dad did not graduate high school. I didn't actually even know any lawyers till I went to law school. And the one thing Dean Baynes didn't mention when he introduced me, this panel is, I was thrilled to be invited because even though I am a lawyer, I do not have a medical degree. I actually ran a healthcare system that provides healthcare to 2 million Native Americans around the country, the Indian Health Service. And he did mention the foundation named after my mother and grandmother. And part of the reason I started that foundation was while I was at the Indian Health Service, I saw how few Native Americans go in the medical profession. And I don't need to tell the doctors on this panel that it is so important for both law and medicine to have people from your community to establish a relationship between, whether it's between lawyer and client, doctor and patient, to have people who look like you and build that trust, because there needs to be trust at the foundation of both those relationships. So sadly, very few Native Americans go into medical school, but also I will echo what Susan said from the legal profession. The legal profession is still over 70% white, even though women have been 50% or more of law school classes for more than a decade. There's still, for the first time, there are more than 50% law firm associates, but at the highest levels, women are still only like 27% law firm partners. And every year, the American Bar Association does a profile of the legal profession, and they actually found during the last 10 years, the number of black lawyers has actually gone down a little bit. So in some ways, we're going backwards. And Native Americans, this probably will not be surprising, they make up 0.5% of the legal profession, less than 1%. So no, I guess to answer your question, Dean Baynes, no, we've got a lot more work to do, so.
Thank you. Well, I would say the same thing, and I have to sort of preface, my people from my general counsel's office is in the room, so these are my personal opinions, not the University of Texas medical branch or the University of Texas system.
The lawyers have taught you well.
They taught me well. They taught me well, and again, it reflects the era we're in. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I think we're still just at the tip of the iceberg. What you see is the fact that all of us stand on the shoulders of people who fought battles long before we did. You know, Herman Barnett, the first African-American student at UTMB. I am the second African-American dean. I follow Danny Jacobs, who was dean before me. And if you look across the country, there are more and more of us that are rising to positions of greater responsibility. But if you look across the landscape of academia, 2 to 3% of faculty at medical schools are underrepresented, or African American. If you include Hispanics, now we run around 5, maybe 7%. Compare that to physicians, only 7% physicians are African American, and only 6% African American, 7% Hispanic. Compared to the population, it's 19% and 14%. So again, we're not up to parity in terms of the population numbers, not even close to parity in terms of what we represent on the academic front. Why is this important? If it wasn't for African American researchers, individuals like Michael Devine, one of my undergraduate classmates, now faculty member at Vanderbilt, we wouldn't have the first treatment for sickle cell disease. He pushed that for decades. He wasn't the only researcher working on it, but he pushed it and got funding that allowed that to exist. We wouldn't have directors of NIDDK that are African American that push for understanding the health inequities in diabetes, kidney disease. We wouldn't have a National Institute of Minority Health that now start to talk about how do we change the landscape of health in America. So if the conference is going to be about justice and health for all, it's that piece of the puzzle that's so important. That's so important for us to have representation, because we will do the innovation and the research and carry the message that's important to us. And that us needs to be a diverse us, because otherwise the question just rests with the rest of the population.
And let me add to my introduction of my colleague, Dr. Mouton, that he is a member of the board of directors of our Association of American Medical Colleges, and actually is the chair of the Association of American Medical College Council of Deans. We had our meeting just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I can assure you that this topic is absolutely top burner in the conversation of the Council of Deans and our Association of American Medical Colleges. So let me ask this question to our panel. What would you say to someone who says that we should admit law school and medical school students and hire lawyers and physicians solely on merit, that race, gender, and ethnicity should never be a factor in decision making? Dr. Mouton, let's start with you.
Reverse
Yes,
direction.
absolutely.
Well, I think my first issue with it is, how do you define merit? We got a conflated view of merit in this country. Merit is supposed to represent what we deem as worthy, what we deem as quality. But we've conflated that into a numeric score on a test or a GPA. That's not what even the word merit means. So we've conflated that. So first we got to fix our definition. Second of all, part of our problem is, in this country, we used to say that admissions and merit and who can be the best lawyer or physician was determined by the faculty of that institution, because they knew what it took to become that. We've now allowed other folks to begin to dictate what is our discipline. We're all part of a profession. By profession, that means we're what? Self-regulatory. That's what defines us. But now we have other people that are trying to tell us what values we should inculcate into our profession in selecting the individuals. So my argument is that in medicine, we've always looked at a different view of what it took to become a doctor. We've gotten better now in actually codifying that into a holistic admission process, where we look not at just how well you took a standardized test. It's already mentioned that, the MCAT score is a reflection of the SAT score, which is a reflection of the PSAT score. And although that does correlate with how well you take another standardized test that's called the USMLE, the United States Medical Licensing Exam, and that correlates with how well you do on the board exams for your subspecialty. All of that has to do with how good you are at taking a multiple choice test. But we also know that it's more important to also understand, are you going to be responsible to take care of the patient in front of you? If you're doing a medical procedure, are you going to run out because you want to, go have a drink and not finish the procedure? You might have got a great grade, but there's a part of professionalism and character that we as admissions bodies for our institutions and a protector of the society that we serve have to look at individuals in a broader context. You heard the students talk about how resilient they had to be to pursue law and medicine. So we get to look at, what's the distance traveled? What kind of resilience and grit do these applicants show? Those are factors that we need to bring to bear. And more importantly, particularly for medical school, the curriculum has changed, so while we're doing problem-based learning where there's small group interactions that discuss cases, how important is diversity so that all the learners now can have a sense of the meaning around those cases, so they can be better physicians when they go out and practice. And so that's why all of this is so important, because the way we teach now relies on the breadth of experience of our learners when they're in the classroom with us. I no longer get to stand up at the podium as a talking head and lecture to 230, 240, 250 people. Our students are in small groups of 10 and 20, interacting with each other, learning from each other. And if there's no heterogeneity in that learning now is necessarily deficient. Because it lacks the broader context in which we're trying to prepare students to go out and practice.
Well, the question, should we hire lawyers, physicians solely on merit? And I would say, if we could actually say what is merit. Are elementary schools all equal? Do everyone go to the best school? No. It's same at the high school level, college. We know standardized tests affect different groups differently. So already by the time you are even applying to law school and medical school, there has been lots of inequities and different evaluations of merit. And then once you enter the workforce, we see that, the evaluations that, I'll just use attorneys, get in a law firm probably is swayed by who you are or what gender you are. Because like I said, women have been over 50% of law school classes for more than a decade or probably a couple decades. And why are they still less than 30% of law firm partners? So there's already race and ethnicity and gender are already baked into decision makings, and so it's not even happening now. That's what I would say.
Excellent question, Dean Spann. So holistic review, the holistic review roadmap by the Association of American Medical Colleges, we use that at Ohio State, and it involves a balanced view of EAM, experiences, attributes, and metrics. And I don't want to replicate what was just said, so I'd like to take this opportunity to speak to this master narrative in the U.S. that's trying to delegitimize diversity, equity, and inclusion and its importance. And I would refer you to a recent publication by Harper and Associates, Truths and Myths about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because when we convene grand conversations like this, we want to be speaking to facts, not someone's narrative aimed to divide us. We know that diversity drives excellence. We know that diversity drives innovation. I have in my office, I have like 6 books by scholars about the value of diversity. Tell that to a learner that's studying to be a doctor at a predominantly white institution, about having programming and courses designed to allow students to communicate better with each other and to allow providers to communicate better with the persons we served, and also our providers themselves being able to develop themselves personally and professionally to serve our very diverse population. As a matter of fact, it's called relationship-centered care, the relationship between the patient and the provider, the relationship with the provider and the community, the relationship amongst the providers, and then that personal professional development. That's what we're practicing. So that's my answer to the question, Dean.
Yeah, I think about it this way. I mean, having heard all of the panels, I think we can agree that we want our institutions to be fair and legitimate. But when you talk about merit-only based admissions or considerations, it ignores the fact that historically the systems and the institutions have preferences already built in for majority culture. And that's not a bad thing, it's just the way it is. But to just say we're going to ignore gender, race, experience, just perpetuates those preferences. So the people who are talking about merit-based admissions won't really tackle the fact that the systems and the institutions and the law firms and the medical schools, et cetera, have hundreds of years of systems and preferences, whether they be express or they be implicit, they be unintentional, whatever you want to, attributes you want to give them, those exist in the system, and we have to just be real about that fact.
So I was a dean of admissions at 2 different law schools for over 30 years. I have probably read 70,000 law school applications. The LSAT and the GPA were always a piece of the puzzle, but just a piece. I always looked at the whole person. You know, I don't think any law school wants 100% of its graduates to all look the same or be the same kind of lawyer. What we all want is for our graduates to be effective. And different kinds of people are going to be effective in different ways. And there are so many different kinds of lawyers and different kinds of things that lawyers do. You know, I said in an earlier conversation in talking about merit and definitions of merit, don't tell me that it's not an indication of merit that somebody grew up having to take care of younger siblings and they spent their entire high school and college career taking care of younger siblings and still succeeded and are now applying to law school. So there's just all kinds of pieces of merit. And it's certainly not only LSAT and GPA. My colleagues in law school admissions, I don't know a single person who ever made decisions solely on the basis of LSAT and GPA, and I don't think that's ever going to be the case.
At the recent Council of Deans that Dr. Mouton and I attended, my favorite lecture was by Dr. Stephen Terziak from Cooper Rowan Medical School in New Jersey. He and a colleague co-author 4 years ago published a book titled Compassionomics. And the conclusion of this book, which is an evidence-based review of the scientific relationship, is that compassionate, empathic relationships are core to our healing as physicians and other health professionals, and probably other professions, including lawyers. You know, we help people, we heal through relationships. And in fact, the data shows that when there is a compassionate, empathic relationship between a healthcare professional and a patient, the outcomes of care are substantially better. Of course, the patients are way happier. Interestingly, the costs of care are lower. And finally, and importantly, the satisfaction, the joy of the healthcare professional is greater. So going back to this concept of relationship-centered care, I would argue that that is an important outcome. And when professionals, be they physicians, other health professionals, attorneys, whatever, develop those kind of relationships with their patients, their clients, that the outcomes are better. So let me ask you, in your experience, do you think that the wider representation of people of all backgrounds shapes or influences legal and medical outcomes? Dr. Mouton, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, I agree with you. I heard the same talk, so I think it does. I think clearly that, like I said, having that diversity not only helps the individual who may be from a different culture or from a majority culture that has not interacted across cultures. They now are in a class where they can understand and have discussions about this coming from someone who can, one of their colleagues, who can give them information, help them understand, make them more empathic toward a broader array of people, because now they have some basis for dialogue and relationships. So they're actually sort of peer-to-peer education in that sense. I think that that role of empathy really is a central part of healthcare. As you remember, he showed a wonderful illustration of artists who, back in the early 1900s, drew what he thought was a representation of the relationship. And the doctor was sitting at the bedside just looking at the patient, being there for this patient who was dying. The science piece of this has sort of moved us a little further away from that as we tried to become, quote unquote, evidence-based and value-based. But even in the face of evidence, you know, we now understand that the evidence says that empathy, compassion, having the ability to connect to a patient, having the ability to relate on a personal level has direct, quantifiable improvements in how care is delivered. And making sure that your medical school class can represent that across the swath of America, so to speak, is hugely important. Because, again, if I come from a background where my ability to understand and relate to another individual cross-culturally, cross-racially is limited, but I have that opportunity to engage with a colleague of mine that can show me how to do that, I have a better chance of achieving that empathy that's going to make a difference for healthcare.
Yeah, I think diversity influences outcomes. I think there's a lot of research that shows diverse teams solve problems better and create better outcomes for organizations, whether they're educational or corporate institutions. But also, for a pillar of our democracy, I'll just talk about like our institutions, our court systems. People have more trust in systems of government if the people in those systems are representative of the communities. So it actually is foundational to our democracy as well to have diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Another great question. So I have a question for the audience. How many of y'all have seen the play Hamilton by a raise of hands? Okay, my favorite scene in Hamilton talks about being in a room where it happens. Maybe I need to say my disclaimer now. My views are my own and not representative of the Ohio State.
I think you said it already. We all heard you the first time.
All right. Okay, we covered. So we're going through strategic planning right now. And I can tell you, I'm in the room speaking to the value of the inclusive excellence ecosystem that we're building at Ohio State to create a competitive advantage in recruitment and retaining talent, top talent, that includes parentheses, learners, staff, and faculty, to accelerate our advancement of mission, vision, and values. And I think the leaders here on this dais here can speak to the influence they've had when they're in that room where it happens. So I'm speaking more from a policy and practice standpoint to answer that question. Thank you.
Again, I look at it from the perspective, I had a law professor who told us early on that your job is not to change hearts and minds. You know, your job is to advocate for your client. And so there's some people who are just not going to believe in the value of DE&I, and we can sit here and espouse statistics and reasons why. I sort of go back to foundational issues, is that whatever side of the issue or however you view the issue, I think we can probably all agree, again, that fair and equal justice is essential to our system. And as lawyers, the integrity of that system, as President Smith mentioned, is integral to its success. And I would say that lawyers were ethically obligated beyond to reduce barriers to fair and equal justice. And if DE&I or equal representation is one of those barriers, then I think as lawyers we are in fact ethically obligated to advocate for systems and practices that add to the integrity of our system.
Well, I certainly know that both physicians and lawyers do some technical things that only they can do, that only doctors can do, that only lawyers can do. But I think a lot of what both doctors and lawyers do has to do with communication and being able to be effective communicators and being able to be effective listeners. And when you have something in common with another person, it's a lot more efficient and probably a lot more effective, the communication in both directions. One of the things Dr. Heads talked about earlier today was cultural competency and understanding the complexity of identities and cultural humility. And I do believe that in order to be effective in either of these fields, you have to be able to communicate effectively, and having that diversity of experience and diversity of background, that's what's going to help you do it.
Thank you. That was a really interesting conversation. Let's move it on to what our professions are doing, at least the legal profession, and be curious what the medical profession is doing in response to the SFAA case. So the ABA has a proposal that would shift away from diversity inclusion as a standard for accreditation to a standard that is for access for all persons. So from diversity and inclusion to access for all persons, and expanding the number of identity characteristics, that existed from the previous standard that revolved around gender, race, and ethnicity, 3 standards, gender, race, and ethnicity, to 14 standards, 14 elements, 14 identities, which is race, color, ethnicity, religion, national origin, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, disability, military status, Native American, tribal membership, citizenship rather, socioeconomic background. So from 3 to 14, and away from the words diversity and inclusion to the words access for all persons. So what do you think of that change? This group in the medical profession doing something similar. And, some might say, isn't this still just identity politics, right? Because you go from 3 groups, identities, now you've gone to 14 identities.
Well, in part, I view it as a reminder to people that diversity is very, very broad, and you need to look at everything. And certainly, from the admissions perspective, we want to look at the whole person and everything about them. The Law School Admission Council has something called the Statement of Good Admissions Practices, SOGAP. And we are in the process of changing the following language in the following way. So currently it says, law school admission officers should give equal opportunity in admission consideration to applicants who are members of underrepresented groups in the legal profession. And we are proposing to change that to should give equal opportunity in admission consideration to all applicants, including applicants who are members of underrepresented groups in the legal profession. And then we go on to say these may include applicants from the LGBTQ plus ethnic and racial backgrounds, applicants with disabilities, applicants who are neurodivergent, applicants who may not have enjoyed adequate opportunities to develop or demonstrate their potential, etc. So we supported the standard 206 expansion.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think 206 is a little bit broader than just those categories. And again, the way I look at it is it's an attempt to put some parameters or define merit. So we're not just looking at race, gender, and ethnicity. No surprise, the passage or adoption is not without controversy. So we want merit-based admissions, but then when you try to begin to define merit-based admissions with any kind of objective criteria, then we don't want that either. So I think that is, the fact that it's so controversial, to me, is a suggestion that it might be effective.
I guess there's also, I'll interject for a second. I think also when you add 14, it's like, are you missing anything? That's the other challenge, right? It's like when you do so broadly, you may be missing something, and I think that's what we saw with some of the panelists. But it is a step. But anything else? Okay. Moving on.
Another excellent question, Dean. So with the statements from the Liaison Committee on Medical Education and also the Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education, what's different is that the statement is tied to a mission. So it states that to achieve mission-appropriate diversity outcomes and of its students, faculty, senior administrative staff, and other relevant members of its academic community. That's LCME Standard 3. And then regarding ACGME, a core requirement, again, it speaks to the program in partnership with the sponsoring institution must engage in practices that focus on mission-driven, ongoing systematic recruitment and retention of a diverse and inclusive workforce of residents, fellows, faculty members, senior administrative staff members, and other relevant members of its community. So both of these initiatives or statements are mission appropriate, and they don't even go into listing 10 different identity groups. Me seeing the statement, it almost seems like, I'm just saying this, and I'm just giving you back. You asked a question of it. It almost seems like the equal opportunity statement was put into the statement that it just identified a lot of different groups. So I suspect one is missing. so I suspect one is, so in medicine is a more of a broader statement, and the mission helps to define its importance.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I'll just say, I have to do my disclaimer now. The proposal, Standard 206, comes from the section of legal education at the American Bar Association. And just so everyone understands, I'm president of the American Bar Association, but the section of legal education is actually an agent of the U.S. Department of Education, and they accredit law schools. So they're independent from like me as president. So I actually don't have insight into the status of the proposal. I'm like on the outside looking in like all of you are. But as I understand it, the proposal, I think they will probably put out a proposal for comment in May on that standard. But just from my personal views unrelated to the standard, we had an interesting discussion at our mid-year meeting at the American Bar Association. We've seen already kind of the fallout of the Supreme Court's affirmative action case and all these attacks on DEI. We've seen law firms roll back pipeline programs. We've seen some companies open up programs that used to be, say, for just African Americans to everyone because they're worried about risk. But we had an interesting discussion, and even the term DEI has been weaponized recently. And I think we don't want to do diversity just for diversity's sake. And so we had an interesting discussion where people said, yeah, there's diversity, equity, and inclusion, but maybe the piece that we should be focusing on is the equity piece, because the question we're trying to answer is there really equal opportunity for everyone, and how do we achieve that equal opportunity? So to the extent looking at things more holistically achieves that goal, then I think it's a laudable goal.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little color commentary to Dr. McDougall. So again, the Liaison Committee of Medical Education accredits medical schools. They've had a diversity standard for 25 years. That standard has always focused on allowing the individual school, again, to define what they will target as their diversity categories. And then it's up to the school to then measure, put in programs to achieve them, but the school dictates it. So for instance, we have schools in North Dakota, they're focused on Native Americans. Other schools may focus on African Americans, other schools may focus on Native Hawaiians. They define what they're gonna focus on, and then they're held accountable to achieving those targets.
Great. Next question, that was great. What would you advise those who might worry that the impact of the Supreme Court case, SFAA decision, may lead to fewer physicians and lawyers from a wide range of backgrounds? And what would you say to students, academics, practicing lawyers, and physicians? Would there be a different thing you would say to them?
You want to go?
Well, actually, go that way. Yes. Sorry, because actually,
my answer would be yes. My answer would be yes.
Okay.
I think when you have such broad communications across the media saying that implicitly, not necessarily explicitly, but implicitly, we're not going to consider a part of you, namely your race, in this thing, that sends a chilling effect. It sends an effect that says, that discourages underrepresented minorities to apply to law school and medical school. Hopefully we won't see that be the case, but what we're hearing in the field, and 1 year into this, is that some are feeling like, it's not worth my effort. I don't feel that they're gonna treat me like I belong in those environments. So hopefully that may be just a blip. We'll recover in a couple years. But certainly when you have the type of media coverage that we've had, when you've had the dismantling of DEI offices across various states, underrepresented minorities are getting a sense that the schools don't want them. And they're like, well, fine, I don't want you either. And so, yeah, there is that effect. I think if you look at a state like California, who did this a while ago, they saw the same thing. Their numbers went down. So I think we can anticipate the same. They've now plateaued and leveled off, but after their initial efforts around this, their numbers declined and then they plateaued. So I think we're going to see the same nationally.
President Smith.
Oh, well, yeah, I kind of agree with the doctor. I mean, you can worry, but you can take action. And I guess I'll try to look at the California situation from a glass half full rather than half empty. Yeah, they did go down, but then it did plateau. So there is some hope there. I think there's hope. And I know a lot of people are tweaking their programs. They're calling them lawyerly tweaks. I'll take insult to that because I think that underestimates lawyers, that we're there to manage risk. Yeah, sure, we do manage risk, but I also think we're problem solvers. And I know between all the doctors and lawyers, there's a lot of creative people in this room, and I think that we can adjust. We still have the same goal. It's just we may get there differently, and I have confidence that we will be able to create admissions programs and other programs at colleges and universities and corporations that will achieve the equal opportunity for all. It just may look a little bit different.
Another excellent question. I would say that we must resource, renew, and refresh our efforts to engage K through 12 school systems to prepare the next generation of learners to become lawyers and physicians. And then if you're asking yourself, well, what communities should we engage to help optimize this effort? So I want to bring to your attention, so at the Kirwan Institute on Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University, they developed a Child Opportunity Index. Now it's 3.0. And knowing that I would be visiting Houston, I created a map with Houston, and what you'll see on this, you can't, it's dark blue and light blue. The light blue represents very low, and then to low, to moderate, to high. This is the dark blue. And what you'll find is that, and then there's also an overlay based on race and ethnicity. And what you'll find when you go to that website later today is that most Hispanic and Latino children live in neighborhoods with very low or low child opportunity indexes, whereas a substantially more non-Hispanic white children live in neighborhoods with a very high to high child opportunity index. So this may help in designating where one focuses. Now this child opportunity index, it includes 29 indicators that measure neighborhood-based opportunities for children, including but not limited to access and quality of early childhood education, high quality schools, green space, healthy food, toxin-free environment, and social economic resources. We must also uplift allyship to optimize the learning environment. At Ohio State, I recently received a grant from the Picker Gold Humanism Society Foundation called Just-in-Time Allyship Upstandard Training. And what we're doing is building out a platform for training so that when persons experience microaggressions in our learning environments, we have tools to address it right then and there. So what does that look like, Dr. McDougall? What does that look like? So it's, we're creating a badge with the 5 Ds from the Right to Be organization: direct, delay, document, distract, delegate, and then a QR code that takes a person to an app that we've developed that will bring them to 8 2-minute videos that actually display what that looks like, the 5 Ds look like. And then also references such as our patient rights and responsibilities document. Because I know a lot of the conversation has been today about concordant relationships. This helps our learners, our workforce to navigate biases in our learning environment. So, well, what happens if you're a medical student, you go in to see a patient, and then they say, well, I don't want you to care for me because of or I don't want any Hispanic doctors taking care of me. So how is that going to be handled? Is it the saying that the customer is always right? Is that the answer? Even though this student chose your institution to matriculate to, they're paying tuition to learn, and perhaps that patient may have some unique diagnosis that would benefit their education. So we're developing those tools to help with that. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, do a little color commentary for my fellow Texans. I'll put it that way, for my fellow Texans. When SB 17 got passed, the part of it that talks about you could no longer do that type of training that he just described, to me, was probably one of the more problematic and difficult parts of that legislation. That means that I, Dean Spann, Dean Baynes, couldn't put something in place to help correct, or at least easily correct, faculty, others who don't understand how to interact in that way. We were hamstrung. We can't, those got disallowed as part of that legislation. And hopefully we will be able, with my lawyer's help and the politicians, maybe get something passed that allows us to go back to at least address that piece of the bill. But that, to me, was something that was more disturbing in a lot of respects to the DEI dismantling.
President Mateo.
Yeah, on the original question, I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think SFFA was specifically designed to blunt admissions of diverse folks. But I think, demographics are on our side. I think we have this year, the applicant pool for law school is the most diverse on record. So the pipeline, at least as it currently stands, looks pretty strong. And it's incumbent upon organizations like Hispanic National Bar Association and other diverse bar associations to really make sure that we are feeding into the pipeline. I think SFFA comes at a time where, although we are still a small group, we're pretty mighty. We are now in spaces, in law firms, in corporate boards, you can't unring the bell. And part of what we do at the HMBA is really try to drive home the point that we don't have a talent deficit, we have an information deficit. And now that we all have access to that information, it's incumbent upon us to share that information and empower our pipeline to give them access, to help navigate SFFA, but also to give them the information that they need to apply to law schools, to apply to medical schools, and really encourage the population. So only time will tell, but I'm going to strike an optimistic note and say supply and demand and demographics will save us.
Okay. Vice President Krinsky.
I would never tell anybody not to worry. I feel like that's what I do for a living, is worry. But I would absolutely say not to give up, and that there is room in that decision for a lot of good work. Applicants are free to write essays about how race has affected them. Admissions officers are free to consider how applicants have been shaped by race or have confronted or overcome barriers and challenges related to race. What I would say to law schools is keep doing holistic admissions. What I would say to applicants is apply and tell your story. Telling your story is the most important thing you can do. Well, probably applying is the most important thing you can do. But having applied, tell your story so that the law school can do holistic admissions. And yes, you're right, it is the most diverse applicant pool. The total number of applicants is up about 4.5%, but all of the subgroups are up more than that. So Hispanic applicants are up something like 8.5%, Black applicants are up over 6%, and that's true of, I think, every subgroup. I guess I'm a worrier, but I'm on the half full side of this one.
Do we know about the medical school applications? I'm diverging from our questions.
So far the data's not fully in, but from what I'm hearing, it seems flat. But the worry is that it's going to drop next year because this kind of came in the sort of the cycle, but it's flat from what I'm hearing.
Next question, next to last question. So it's sort of related to the last question. So what would you advise that the law schools or medical schools do legally to try to admit, or law firms to, or hospitals to legally admit, recruit, or hire diverse populations of future physicians and lawyers or attorneys?
Certainly for law schools, and we keep using this term holistic admissions, which has now become this shorthand for look at everything, have a broad view of merit, think about what your objective is. You want to admit people who are going to succeed and who are going to be, in the case of law schools, effective lawyers, in the case of medical schools, effective physicians, and look for those qualities in these people. Certainly pathway programs, I think, are absolutely critical, getting more and more people into pathway programs. LSAC both funds pathway programs at a number of law schools and has for over 20 years. We also have our own pathway program, which we are trying to scale up so that we can bring even more prospective students into the, well, I'm not saying pipeline, into the pathway.
President Mateo.
I'll go back to what my earlier comment. I think that certainly for law schools and law firms, partnering with bar associations and using the bar associations as part of your outreach. I don't think that has been done enough. Oftentimes, law firms especially say, well, we can't find diverse candidates. Well, you're not looking that hard, and you're not looking in the right places. And so I think it's Look, no one is going to come and save us, right? At the HMBA, part of my discussion is what can we be doing as a bar association, not just laying it at the feet of the law schools or the law firms. What can we be doing to demystify the process? What can we be doing to better prepare our law student and young lawyers? What can we be doing to partner with different organizations to put our candidates in front of the right law schools and the right law firms? So much of this is going to require us as a community to engage in community building, engage in partnerships, extend the hand to our medical school colleagues, and really be creative, as President Smith said.
Great. Yes. Doctor.
Another excellent question. I think we should start with focus on the culture and the climate of our higher education institutions. I know at The Ohio State, about 3 years ago, our top 200 leaders completed implicit bias awareness and mitigation training. That was followed to complete that fiscal year with about 17,000 staff and faculty. The next year, 16,000. The next year, about 15, 16,000. So we're trying to build an inclusive excellence ecosystem. Regarding the selection of learners, we're using a version of, we talked about UC Davis earlier today. They're really leading regarding putting forth innovation in selecting students. So they've developed the socioeconomic disadvantage scale. It includes 8 factors, such as being a family assistance program recipient, any applicant contribution to family income, and highest level of parental education. They have at least 3 publications concerning this work. Dr. Fenton and Dr. Henderson. I would recommend, if you have an opportunity, to look at that. It's really making a big difference. And then I'm going to end by saying courage is important. And I have a quote from Dr. Maya Angelou. I am convinced that courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue consistently. You can be kind for a while, you can be generous for a while, you can be just for a while, or merciful for a while, even loving for a while. But it is only with courage that you can be persistently and insistently kind and generous and fair. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. President Smith.
Well, I guess I'll just go back to the original question in that I'm glad the word legally was in the question to admit, recruit, and hire diverse populations. I agree with what Susan said and Daniel said. Holistic admissions is, I think, in keeping with the Supreme Court's decision. And we need to have the Pathways programs. I know for Native Americans, there's the Pre-Law Summer Institute, PLSI, that's run out of New Mexico. That's an example of one for Native American students. That is, most of the Native American lawyers do go through that program. Also, I agree with Daniel about bar associations. I know that the American Bar Association, we have a pipeline council, and also just coming up in a few weeks, we have May 1st is Law Day, and we go out into the schools and talk about the rule of law, civics education, and that's very important as well. And I think in terms of schools, we heard from the previous panel, a professor said that a student came up to her and said that she had never had her in a class, but just by her being there, that attracted the student to go to that law school. And I've had similar experience as president of the American Bar Association, because there's a National Native American Bar Association, which I was president of, but there's actually, it's getting more, but there's not a lot of Native Americans involved in the American Bar Association. And last year, I was at the National Native American Bar's 50th anniversary, and a young Native lawyer came up to me and she said, "Oh, Mary, you know what? I got to be honest with you. I'm not a member of the American Bar Association because I just thought that the ABA doesn't have anything for me." She said, "But seeing you in that role, I think maybe, just maybe they do." So I say recruit diverse faculty, because that will also attract the students as well.
I'm glad you said legally as well, too.
Absolutely.
My general counsel's office, I've been accused of being a jackleg lawyer. So for those of you who don't know, that's the equivalent of a jackleg mechanic, except for law school. I think that really it gets down to, again, what's already been said, using a holistic admissions process. I think what we're trying to do is, again, continue to broaden our scope in terms of searching for talent, making sure that we outreach to all the locations where talented individuals from diverse backgrounds are pursuing undergraduate educations that have a propensity to enter medical school, and letting them know that our institution is here, we're available for you, and we try to set up an environment that once they get here, they're supported to be successful. And we communicate that message through our recruitment. So we have to intensify our recruitment to address some of these issues. I think that, I'm afraid to say this because the folks that are against us will pick this up, I'm sure. But one of the things that as I think about it, one of the issues with the essays and reading those is the volume. But we now have this little thing called AI. And figuring out how to apply artificial intelligence to not only reviewing and identifying candidates in a way that allows us to capture what we want in our medical school classes, allowing it to go out and search for us to encourage individuals to apply for our schools. Applying technology may be a solution, although, like I said, I'm a little hesitant to say that because they'll soon ban that or something in doing this work. But I think that presents an opportunity as well.
So we only have 8 minutes left. No, 6 minutes left now, which has been a great conversation. I think we'll bypass the last question and open it to the audience. We might have our audience here, our in-studio audience, and at home or at office or wherever they are audience. Are there any questions for this esteemed panel of professionals in both our professions, law and medicine? No questions? Going once? Okay.
We've covered it all.
Okay. Dr. Spann, do you want to do the last question?
Well, if no other questions, we'll ask the last one that we had prepared. Do you believe that there are gaps in empirical research or whether greater diversity in the medical and legal professions mitigates health legal disparities or improves trust in health and legal institutions? Do we need more empirical research?
Well, I'm going to say we always need empirical research. That's kind of how we innovate and how we create, and certainly in the health sciences, I suspect in legal sciences as well. So there's always need for more research. I would say the problem in this day and age, I'm going to relate somehow, I think, Steve, you may have heard me say this before, I relate something through my experience working with legislative bodies. I was at a reception after one of my legislative meetings, and one of the conservative people were there. We were laughing and having conversation. And some kind of way we got to talking about news media and that sort of thing. And this individual made a statement. I told her I was going to use it in public. She said, well, you know, the problem is, Doc, facts have a liberal bias. I repeat, facts have a liberal bias. So we can do all the research in the world, have all the data in the world, but for some of the individuals that are making policies and reacting to this, it's just another liberal bias. And you have to understand that and be prepared to address it, because that's how they're looking at this. So yeah, there may be gaps in data and may need more research, but when it comes down to it, they're going to view it as just another fact that has a liberal bias.
Well, I'll say yes and no, because I think we have a lot of research that already shows that, and sometimes I think people ask for more research just to postpone things and say, well, we don't have enough data yet. I think we do, but the world is constantly changing, so the environment constantly changes, so you need to keep up with the research. And then I always look at it, obviously I think about Native Americans, and I know, for instance, there's only 2 studies, one just last year, that studied Native Americans in the legal profession. Most of the other studies, they're not mentioned at all, or they're a little footnote, little asterisk down at the bottom. And so, yeah, I agree that I think to move forward, we have enough research, but it's always good to do more research because certain groups are still not represented well in the research, and the environment constantly changes.
Another great question. I'll refer back to the Harper and Associates Truth and Myths, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Is like 64 pages, and the top scholars in this area cite their scholarship. I'm thinking that just as we know and compare states in the U.S. from a healthcare perspective that have adopted the Affordable Care Act and the increased access that has provided for populations made vulnerable by socioeconomics, disability, that this may be a time to do some research comparing states that have banned diversity, equity, and inclusion with states who embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, or at least have not disbanded diversity, equity, and inclusion, and look at learner outcomes such as recruitment, retention, and then perhaps even ask those students who you are recruiting, did the fact that the state backed away from its diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment influence your decision on whether or not to attend an institution in a respective state? That seems to be right opportunity for mixed methods investigation.
I think a lot of the earlier panels, at least on the legal side, address the fact that there's not much, if any, research on the impact of DE&I and initiatives on either outcomes or participation in the legal profession. But I do agree. I mean, it'd be nice to study it. It'd be good to have data. I think that at the end of the day, especially in the law firm context, a lot of the drivers are not going to be data. A lot of the drivers are going to be, again, economics. And the way I see it sitting in a law firm is that the law firms are going to continue to do that which furthers the economic interest of the law firms. And thus far, most of the corporations are demanding diverse teams, and I really don't see that changing. So additional research would be helpful. I think more helpful is cultivating the drivers that influence the decision-making at law firms especially.
I loved what President Smith said about sometimes the demand for more research is to delay decisions. I mean, there is research. There's a study, it's kind of old now, quite a few years ago, that looked at the 75 largest counties in the United States and at the difference in the length of criminal sentences for Black and Latinx defendants as compared to white defendants, and found that those differences were smaller when there was more diversity in the local legal profession. There's also research on immigration courts and the much better results for the person who is being thrown out of the country or trying to be thrown out of the country if they have, for example, Spanish-speaking representation. So there is research. LSAC is very fortunate. We have a strategic research group which is right now developing a landscape tool. So you may have heard that ETS, the Educational Testing Service, has a landscape tool that looks at where an applicant grew up, went to high school, et cetera. And we're now working on one for the law school context. Earlier, several times we've heard that the most important determinant of health is zip code. And this looks very much at zip code and the experiences that someone might have had before coming to law school. So I think that research is going to tell us a lot.
Great. Well, that concludes this great panel. Let's give them a round of applause. And it also concludes this great conference. So many, many thanks for our partnership with the law school, with the medical school, the law school's partnership with the medical school, and with Dr. Spann. And many thanks to April Moreno and to Jessica Mantell and everyone else who has participated in helping make this happen, all the panelists, and everyone. I don't know, Dr. Spann, you want to say some final words?
I just want to add my words of gratitude. I think it's been a great, great conference, and I'm so appreciative of all our participants and panelists and of our organizing committee. You all did a great job.
Absolutely. A round of applause.